Audio on. There I am. Is that me? That's me. Hi for everyone on YouTube who might be watching us. This is the Amateur Hour. Amateur Radio Hour, let's call it that. My name's Gary, Ham Radio EY. We do this introductory session to work through some bugs, and we found some bugs. So for folks in the Zoom classroom, if you could please monitor yourself and mute your microphones, because every time you talk adds a little background noise that the folks on YouTube probably don't want to hear. But we're doing good. We're starting out, and we're going to go right ahead. What we're doing tonight is teaching the Amateur General Class course, which is important this year because July 1st, there was a new question pool for the general class. And for those who might be just tuning in and casually going, what's that? We have 3 levels of amateur radio licensing in the United States. The technician is the beginning level. The general class is the intermediate level, and the extra class is the very top level. So we'll be teaching the intermediate level course here online to a group of students in Zoom, and also with a group of folks watching on YouTube. Normally we'd have 3 people here in the studio. Tonight we've only got 2, so we probably will not be active on the chat tonight on YouTube. I apologize about that, but there was a scheduling conflict. So we have a new question pool this year, which means that the previous videos that we've done for general class training, the knowledge is the same, but the questions that we covered are not. And so we're going to be going from this book. This is the American Radio Relay League's General Class License Manual, 10th edition. This is the book that we want to be using. If you have a 9th edition or earlier, the knowledge is okay, but the questions that are covered in the book will be different, and that's no good because we want you to pass the test. So we'll be going chapter by chapter in the book. We'll tell you more here in just a second. If you're watching us on YouTube and you'd like to get involved as far as our mailing list to receive announcements and links, Dave, if you would take the laptop, please. You could send me an email at w4eey@arrl.net, w4eey@arrl.net, and say, Gary, I'd like to get on the general class YouTube mailing list, and I will put you on that list. So tonight what we're going to be doing are some introductions. We'll tell you a little bit about ourselves, and then we'll be listening to our students to have them tell us a little bit about themselves and what they hope to get out of the class. So let's get started with me. So I've been in ham radio for a while. I was first licensed back in 1969 back in Midland, Michigan, which is my hometown. I was Whiskey November 8 Golf Alpha Juliet. That was my first call sign. It was a novice call sign. That's what the N in it meant. And it meant I could only send and receive Morse code with a power level of 75 watts. But it was fun. It was enjoyable. And I didn't do any DX or long distance international contacts, but I did do a lot of contacts around the United States, and it was very fascinating. I was interested in radio. I'd been a shortwave listener, listening to international broadcasters, Radio Moscow, Radio Peking, Voice of America, BBC, and so radio was a thing back then. This is pre-internet. So it was fascinating for me. I joined an Electronics Explorer post. My mentor there was Paul Woodland. His call sign was W8EEY. You might have heard that before. Also I was able to take some electronics training in high school. Actually 2 hours of electronics training every day for 2 years. Wow. And so I am a strong advocate for vocational training. If you don't have vocational training in your schools, try to get it back because it really helps. It set me up for success. I was able to go to college then, majoring in broadcasting at Central Michigan University. And from there, I had an engineering background, technical background, plus the broadcasting background, and was able to work in commercial and public broadcasting. Ultimately, in 1988, I joined the staff of the Voice of America, the U.S. government's international broadcasting arm, and for 20 years I worked for VOA overseas as a foreign service officer, and had a chance to be stationed to various places like Liberia, Morocco, Germany, Sri Lanka, and Greece. It was a fascinating career, and I retired from VOA after 20 years in 2008 and came here to South Carolina. About 5 years after I got here, I got back into ham radio. I was not active at the time, and involved in the local club, and the club needed somebody to teach. And so somehow I got roped into it, and there's a story about my first general class in which everybody loved the class, but nobody passed. We are not going to do that this time. We're going to get you all to pass. So that's the plan. You'll hear a lot more about me as we go along. I appreciate your time. Dave, why don't you go over and switch yourself on and tell us a little bit about you?
All right, very good. Yeah, we both got started in ham radio about the same time. I was first licensed as a novice class licensee in the late 60s as a teenager, which kind of seems like forever ago at this point. Back at that time, we had a CW Morse code requirement, 5 words a minute, and I moved on to the general class license and then the advanced class license, so that got me started in ham radio. So I've basically been in electronics my whole life. Then life happened, as they say, and after maybe the first 5 to 10 years of ham radio, I let it lapse and got back involved again in 2018, and have been extremely active ever since that time. My career-wise, I started out my first corporate job with Motorola and was with them for about 30 years, and had, I'd say, 3 fascinating careers while I was there. The one of greatest interest to all of you is probably cellular. I was responsible for turning up the first 25 or 30 cellular systems all over the United States. So that was pretty exciting because it was new technology and there were no technicians at the time. We had to do all of that training. So I've been in Greenville, that was in Northern Illinois. I've been in Greenville for the last 18 years, hanging out down here. The weather's a lot nicer. I really enjoyed seeing the snowstorm in the rearview mirror when we left Illinois for the last time. Gary contacted me in December of 2016 and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about something. And what he wanted to talk about was the idea of doing an extra class license that following January. And ever since then, Gary and I have been working together. So we've had a lot of fun. My early background in ham radio, well, in the very beginning, it was all Morse code because that's all I was allowed as a novice. But when I got relicensed and didn't do very much until digital got my attention, FT8. I made a lot of FT8 contacts, and the reason that was attractive was because we were in a homeowners association under their restrictions, and I had to hide all my antennas. And FT8 is a good weak signal mode, so I was able to get my worked all states and DXEC awards with digital. I've been involved in SOTA, which is Summits on the Air. I've got a friend that kind of guided me into that, where you go to hilltops, mountaintops, and make radio contacts. It's a fun thing to do if you enjoy hiking. So I'm involved with Field Day and SOTA and POTA, Parks on the Air. And I've been doing 1-hour CW contests. I've started up in that area. And as far as personal motivation, one thing that really turns me on is to work with people who didn't think that they could do something and help them to that goal. A lot of people come into ham radio with no technical background, and they think that they're at a disadvantage. Well, there might be a little bit more learning there, but what thrills me is to see people come along and earn their license or their upgrade. So that's my personal motivation. Just enjoy helping others to get there. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Gary.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Dave. And what I'd like to do now is to go down a list here. We have our participants in the class. It used to be alphabetical. I think it still is. Well, no, it doesn't look alphabetical. Anyway, we're going to start on the top of my list. It's Captain Pat. So if you would go ahead and unmute, and Dave, if you would remember to push the Zoom button and the audio. Captain Pat, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, good evening. From Vancouver, Washington. Vancouver, USA. I'm not in Canada.
Okay, cool.
Portland, Oregon. To start off, say that Gary, you and Dave have already got me through all 3 levels. I've passed all 3 of the tests from watching your videos. I'm coming back this time to kind of try to pick up some pointers on the way you teach, because I have been very impressed by both of y'all's teaching, ways of teaching, and try to take some of that and work with the youth in the area. Work with the local clubs and get back and get some of these kids going on some of the STEM stuff. I'm a retired high voltage lineman. I traveled around the country for 50 years, all states west of the Mississippi, building the high voltage grid. So like you did, I was working with a bunch of feds. Work for both public and private utilities, and worked on a lot of the big grid projects, that type of thing. Radios were just a tool for us in the construction business. The projects at times were hundreds of miles long, transmission lines. So we used radios extensively to communicate back and forth. Formal radio etiquette wasn't really used there, but we did kind of follow the rules as I found them out as I went through this class. I originally had a restricted radio license for flying an airplane. They told me you had to have that, so I got one. Nobody ever asked me for it, but I had it. And let's see. A few years in the 90s, I found some time to go up to Alaska and drive a charter boat for a few people. Really enjoyed that, but my wife got tired of working 2 jobs so I could fish 3 months a year. Anyway, I retired in 2014 and 2018, and didn't have any real plans for retirement. We were going to travel and such. Well, COVID-19 happened, and that took care of 2020. 2021 was my year for cancer, and I'm 27 months post chemo and radiation. I am cancer free at this time.
Yay!
And I was laying around one day watching YouTube, trying to figure out something to do, looking for a new hobby basically, and I came across your videos, and I thought that sounds interesting. It looks kind of complicated. It looks a little bit above me. And I'm going to take a shot at it to exercise the brain for a while. Well, I studied for, I don't know, 6 weeks, 2 months, real heavy studying, all day, every day. And the 1st of June, I got a chance to test, and I passed the tech and the general. I hadn't opened the extra book, but I only missed 1 too many questions there. So a lot of it is it's common sense. It's stuff from the basics that I knew just working with the radio systems. From here on, like you say, it's a license to learn, and I want to take what I'm learning and try to pass it on to the kids and the young people, and try to get some more people involved in some more skill sets. That's basically it.
Okay, very good, Pat. I appreciate it very much. I think I just discovered why I'm no longer able to mute everybody, because I made you the host when I exited. You're still the host. So if you can somehow figure out in your Zoom client there to give me the host capabilities back, it's called Ham Class, that's my name, then I can maybe mute everybody. Okay, somebody's got Samsung, SM dash something, I can't read it. If somebody's got us on a Samsung, would that be you? Speak up. Nope. Okay. Well, we'll come back to you. Tim Calhoun, is it? I can't. Go ahead. Nope.
Okay.
Cashin. Tim
Now,
Cashin. There we
okay,
go.
I'm unmuted now, I believe.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, that's last name is Cashin, just like fashion except with a C.
Perfect. What brings you here
Is that what
tonight?
well, I've been retired for a couple of years, and I was looking for another hobby. Back a couple of years ago, I did get a blood cancer that I've been battling for the last couple of years, and my hobbies have been I was officiating sports. I did football, volleyball, baseball, and softball, and I couldn't do that any longer. And so I had to go ahead and find me something else. And so my neighbor around the corner here, he's a big ham operator. And so I went ahead and talked to him about getting my license and various things. I'm a retired school teacher. I taught computer applications, so that's where my technology kind of came into play at. And I was also the athletic director at our school. And so that's where my hobby has been for the past probably 25 years or so. And so I needed something else to go to. And so that's why I tried to do this. I've got my technician license about a year ago. And so now I'm ready to just kind of move on a little bit and kind of get my general license and go ahead and go ahead and see what else I can do as far as furthering my hobby. So I live in Little Washington, North Carolina. That's on the East Coast. There's the Pamlico Sound between me and the Outer Banks out at Hatteras and Ocracoke. And so I'm still just trying to move on and doing that. Not very many hams in eastern North Carolina just because of the number of people here. But anyway, that's where I'm at right now.
All right, Tim, thank you so much. And I know exactly where Washington, North Carolina is. VOA has a transmitting station in Greenville, North Carolina.
Yes, they do.
And I actually was the manager of that station for about 3 years. And I was also a member of the Bright Leaf Amateur Radio Club there in Greenville.
Okay.
So, yeah. Great to have you along. Go ahead and mute yourself again, Tim, if you would. And our friend Stanley, Stanley was in our technician class. Stanley, you want to just say a few words to the group? You are unmuted. Okay. Hearing nothing, Stanley. Steve, KD4, I got to get a bigger monitor. Steve, come on in. No, he went away. All right. Alfred, come on in.
Okay, Gary, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Alfred Archer. I was living over in Gwinnett County, and about 4 years ago, I moved over to Spalding County in Georgia, in a HOA community. Had no idea that it was a hazard to ham radio. Just kidding, but met a great group of guys out here, and we got together and we formed amateur radio group, and they offered a 1-day crash course, and which we all took and passed that same day, became a technician. As time went on, I tried was to take the different tests online, got a little bit frustrated and just forgot about general, and I left it. And now I'm starting to regain my interest and get back to where I should be as general. So now I'm taking your classes. I also watched you on YouTube for a couple of years, and I watched the classes that you did and really appreciate your teaching. So that's why I'm here, hoping to pass again this time by taking your class.
Wonderful, Alfred. We're very happy to have you here. And yeah, I don't want to teach a 1-day crash course. That would give me a headache as an instructor. All right, if you would go ahead and mute yourself, please. I don't think we ever heard from Steve, KD4KHI.
Hey, this is Steve. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Hey, my name's Steve Cawthorne. I'm from Easley, South Carolina, just right outside of Greenville. My dad was engineer with educational TV for many years and was a ham operator. And I used to sit in his little shack and listen to him do Morse code days at a time. And I tried that. And I got halfway through and it just started running together. And, but anyway, I worked up to my technician license and had it for many years now. And I'm just ready to move on up to general class and use some of the equipment he left me. It's just sitting, collecting dust. So I wanted to get in this class and try to move on up to general.
Sounds good, Steve. Well, you're not too far from me because I'm just in Pendleton, South Carolina, which is very near Anderson. So we're just down the road from you. Very good. All right. So if you go ahead and mute yourself, if you would. Bob Dahl, I can't read it, KD4Q something. Come on in.
Hi. Can you see me? I don't know if you can see me or not.
At the moment, we can't see your video, but your name comes up on the screen.
All right. Well, I keep engaging it, and my picture comes up, and then it I don't know if somehow it disappears. But anyway, I got my technician's license about 2 years ago. I'm retired. I was the director of operations for an investment advisory firm in Louisville, which is where we lived until I retired. And now we're in Bedford, Kentucky, where we own a farm. We thoroughly enjoy that and being outdoors. Shortly after I bought my first radio set, I joined a amateur radio club in Madison, Indiana, which is just right across the river from where we lived. And so, I was working the repeaters and enjoying that. And then some folks in the club were talking about high frequency and, bouncing radio signals all over the world. And that just fascinated me. So that's why I'm taking this class, so I can get my general, and then I'll buy a high an HF set and start working some of the different bands. When I watch the guys do it, I watch them when we have POTA and the different events, and it just fascinates me of being able to talk to people all over the world, and I'm very interested in that. And I'm also interested in just providing some services to our community. I live in a county where we only have 8,800 people, so it's small. We have a sheriff department, and that's about it. And so I am interested in ours and race. I know it doesn't particularly pertain probably to this course, but I eventually want to get involved in that just so I can help the community when we have emergency. So anyway, I'm just fascinated with that. And also, just so you know, I grew up in the Dayton, Ohio area, and we would drive up to Cincinnati to visit family and friends up there. And right out of Cincinnati, there was a huge VOA facility, just phenomenal, with all the antennas and the wires they had. It's all gone now. In fact, they have a museum there in Cincinnati, and I don't know if you've ever been there or heard of it, but I haven't had a chance to visit it. COVID shut it down for a long time, but anyway, so I just wanted to pass that on to you.
Right, indeed. That's the VOA Museum now, and you can go up there and I've actually donated some of my old artifacts to the museum. So yeah, it's wonderful. All right, let's move on to Carol Scott. Come on in and tell us maybe a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the class. I'm very thankful to be able to be here. Let's see, I got my technician license a month ago, at the end of July, and I really haven't even gotten my radios up. But what happened with me is I went, a long time ago, a hand tried to get me interested, and I was like, no way, I'm not doing any of that. But then I went up on Balsam Mountain near here, up on the Blue Ridge, and I saw some guy put up his Parks on the Air station. And I took a look at his situation. I thought, now that's pretty smart. Would be worth doing. And I thought, I'm going to do that. So anyway, what happened is I inherited some money. So during the COVID time, I figured I better get all my radios. Well, I didn't know a thing about it. So I got on there, found Dave Castler, and he was doing what was called a reference station. So I went down to his equipment list and started buying what he said to buy. So basically, I didn't know a thing about it. But and then recently, some people that I know all decided we'd get licensed together. I wrote you about that.
Right.
So they're all going to be in your technician class. But what happened is there was going to be a ham fest near me. And I found out they were going to do testing. So I thought, okay, I got to get ready for that. So I studied for a short period of time, but I didn't really absorb all that information that I got it down to get the test passed, but
Right.
I couldn't do it by just memorizing answers. There was no way that information was going to stick. So I actually did cover quite a bit of material in a little bit of time. But so what I'm doing now is carrying on with the general because I've got this IC 7300. Don't know a thing about it, but I want to know how to use it. And the only drawback I see for my situation is I'm up on top of a mountain, no antenna, and I have no idea if I could reach one, but I guess that'll come. So that's where I'm at.
All right.
Glad to be here.
We'll get you through it. And yeah, mountain tops actually, or mountain sides can actually give you gain in certain directions. So you're going to be in good shape. All right, my mute all button is working again because they gave me the host capabilities. So yay, yay, yay. All right, now that was Carol. My friend Charlie Wall, who called me on the phone this morning. Charlie, go ahead and hit unmute and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Can you hear me?
We hear you.
All right. Well, a little bit about me. I was first licensed as a technician in 2006. And in February of that same year, I got my general. And as Gary would tell you, I tried several times on getting my extra and never could do it. So I'm taking the general course as a refresher. So when I take my extra in January, I will be able to understand the nomenclature of the super sophisticated words that I struggle on. And let's see, I'm a retired firefighter for 25 years. And that's just about all that I can tell you about me.
Well, super. Thank you for your service. We truly appreciate it, and great to have you along. All right, now over to Jack, which I think is probably Jackie. Come on in, Jackie. Go ahead and unmute and say hey.
Hello. Hi, how are you?
We're good. We can hear you, but we can't see you. But maybe that's on purpose. Oh, now we can't hear you. Now you muted. Almost. It started there. Try it again. Oh, okay, Jackie's gone. Oh, there she is. There's the video. All right, and now unmute. Lower left-hand corner, or I'm not sure what device you're on. No, still muted.
Is that unmuted?
Okay, now you got it. Come on in.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jackie. I've done the general class before, but they changed everything, so I'm trying again. I'm hoping to take my technician class next week or the week after. I still haven't accomplished that, but I keep studying with the hope I'll get there. But I'm close with that, and I'm hoping they haven't changed the question pool too much. I looked, and it didn't look as bad as I thought it was going to look. So here I am.
Yay, Jackie, you're tenacious. Keep going. You can do this.
Well, you know, I keep having all these obstacles, and part of it is I don't probably spend enough time on it. But I'll tell you, I looked at the question pool for this without looking at the book.
Yeah.
And I probably got half of the questions, and I got half of them right without even cracking a book or studying. So I think I can get part of this.
You can do this. I know you can. Great. Excellent.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Great to see you. All right, Jerry, is it Bro? Is that how you pronounce it? Go ahead and unmute and come on in.
Good afternoon from here anyway. I'm in California, Central California. There you go. And I started out when I was younger. I was kind of always interested in ham radio. Actually, professionally, I was an advertising photographer, and then got into commercial print, and family and all the other stuff. I just kind of sidelined it. And when I retired, I kind of was interested in, still interested. So I went to a local ham radio club meeting just for the heck of it, and met a couple of really interesting guys. And one of them, because I'd been studying for my technician, one of the guys suggested, well, they're going to have a ham cram and testing here in about 2 weeks. You probably know most of it. Why don't you do the ham cram and take the test? So I did and passed. So that was just before COVID hit. So then everything kind of came to a screeching halt. I bought a handheld, but from where I am, I can hit the local repeater, but not really well. And I wasn't in the mood to deal with trying to put up an outside antenna. So once things kind of calmed down with COVID, put up an outside antenna, joined the radio club. Actually, I'm on the board. I got a board meeting here at 5:30. So when we're done, I'm going to be scrambling to get over there. But I'm looking forward to going up to general. I've been reading it, thinking about it. So I think I made a commitment to get it done.
Well, just like Jackie, you can do it, and we'll get you there. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it. All right, now over to Kevin. That's the only indication I have. Go ahead and unmute, and let's hear your story. Kevin?
Yep, that's me. My name's Kevin Starr. I live in Northwest Indiana, near Chicago. I guess if familiar with that part of the world. I've been a technician in ham radio for about a year. I got into ham radio mostly because of the sailing I do.
Right.
I do a lot of offshore sailing in Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. And I wanted to know how to communicate more effectively with the radios we use on the water, which are just VHF radios. But that's what got me interested. And then a guy I worked with was a ham a long time. And then I pretty much have used all the privilege I have now, so I want to be able to do more. So I do a lot on 10 meters, FTA, messing with Olivia and the other digital modes. So just want to be more, man. You know, when band conditions allow you to not communicate 10 meters, I got nowhere to go.
Well, we'll get you on the other bands. That sounds great. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right, moving on to my neighbor and fellow member of the Anderson Radio Club, Mary Ellen. That would be you. Go ahead and unmute and say hello, please.
Hello, hello, hello. I've been a ham since 1992. I'm a technician. I want to move up. I started out being a CBer. All my friends moved on, and I went to Radio Shack, learned to do Morse code. Back then, we had to get 21 words a minute. And I'm also into weather. I'm also storm chasing, and I'm ready to move on and ready to move out on some things. I'm retired. I enjoy it. I'm fixing to take some trips coming up on the plane. I'm gonna be out on the coast in October for 2 weeks. I'm gonna be touring the coast. I'm just looking forward and moving up, just, more challenging in life. But I enjoy being a ham. It has the challenging part is what I like. Thank God we don't have code anymore. I don't know if I can still do code, but if I had to, I know I could, because that was the test. I went from novice to technician in one shot. Now I'm going to try to go for the general and extra in one shot, and that's going to really rock my world. But other than that, I enjoy it. It's really been fun.
Well, you do just fine. We'll get you there step by step. We'll get you to the general, and then we have an extra class that will be teaching the same format starting in January, and that'll get you up to the final rung. But great to have you with us, Mary Ellen. All right, Michael Owens, I think it is. Go ahead and unmute and say hey.
Hey, how are you? I'm from New Jersey. My brother's a ham in Tennessee. Back in April, I took Scott Rosenfield's class. I think he's at Indiana, and I tested at Anchorage online. Successful, everything was great, and I want to move up from there. My brother's an extra, so I would love to take your next class after this class and learn more.
Absolutely, you're very welcome. So that's great. Sounds like a plan. All right, Mike, did we have you already? K0, I can't read it. Kilo Oscar 6, I think it is. Oh, where'd he go? Go ahead, say hey. There you are. Did we hear from you already?
I just spoke to you
from
New Jersey.
Okay, very good. Sorry. All right. Scott Ammerman, your turn is up. Come on in.
Hi, good evening. How y'all doing?
Doing good.
Good. Yeah, I've been retired for about 5 years now, and my daughter and son-in-law live in Fort Mill, which is outside of Charlotte. We went down for vacation, and he had a ham radio set up and whatever, and I got talking to him, and I got hooked. And lo and behold, we went back down for Christmas, and he bought me a little, and that was all. And I'm more of this type of classroom rather than reading. I don't really retain reading, so I listen to your technician class over and over and over again on YouTube. And I finally passed my technician test about a year or so ago. And I was waiting, knew the new textbook was coming out, so I was hoping to do something like this for the general class. So I'm really appreciative and thank you for that.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well, we try to keep our hand in because nobody else wants to take our job. So, all right. Stanley, we tried you before. Are you there now? Can you unmute and just say hello to the group, Stanley? Okay, you've unmuted, but I can't hear you. All right. That's a technical issue. That's one of the reasons why we do this class, so we'll have to look into that. All right. Sydney Bond, come on in and maybe unmute and say hello.
Okay, can you hear me?
We hear you fine.
Okay. I am a retired teacher. Retired now for about 6 years. I've had my tech license for about a year and a half, maybe two. And this is not my wheelhouse. So it's kind of scary to me, but I am interested, like like Bob Dole said, I'm interested in the emergency side. When everything hits the fan, I think that ham radio will be very key to that, helping people. So I'm interested in that. And I also want to say hi to Alfred Archer, because he's in my ham radio club. And so I see him pop up on here. Anyway, I'm just hoping I can pass the general and just, get some more privileges so that I can be of more use.
Wonderful.
That's it.
Great to have you here. And finally, William Robinson. Go ahead and unmute and say hello to the group.
Okay, can you hear me?
We hear you fine.
Okay, my call sign is KN4UOR. I live in Fratlock, North Carolina. That's near Hendersonville, North Carolina. It's a southwest North Carolina mountain area. My home is at about 2,600 feet on a small mountain, so I get good coverage to a lot of repeaters. And I got my license back in May of 2019. I've been pretty much working with DMR and in the UHF. We have our own radio, FCC radio system in the community, and I met a ham while we were trying to revive that system, and he's the one that kind of got me interested in getting the tech, and now he's bugging me to get the general. His call sign is W5VM, Vern Dyer. I don't know if anybody knows him. He lives in our community. But anyway, I retired from National Security Agency back in 1996 and worked as an engineering technician and radio communication specialist. So I know about a lot about signals, but I look at them from the backside, where you look at the signal and try and figure out what it's doing and how it's designed. So right now I'd like to get into the UH or the VHF and learn a bit about that. I have never done any antenna design or anything like that. So this should be interesting.
Wonderful, William. Super. Was there anyone else that we did not get to that I couldn't see with the time? Go ahead, come on in.
Ed Keith, KC1LQT, and I typed that in wrong.
Go ahead.
Anyway, I first got a Heathkit novice preparation class in 1978 and couldn't figure out the Morse code and pretty much forgot about it until 2019. And then I decided it was time to get back into it, went down to, I'm up in Boston, so I went down to MIT, who have tests every month, or did back then, and got my technician, and then watched your class on the radio, on the internet, and watched your extra class also, but all the in-person classes shut down for COVID, and the online classes looked awfully confusing. So I haven't done anything since. So I'm getting ready for my general, and hope to class general and extra soon.
Very good.
So that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Ed. And finally, there's one more person who's in a vest, high visibility vest in their car, I believe. And the only name I have is Samsung. But yeah, come on in.
Hi, Gary. This is Chan Tail from WWC. I'm sorry, I just got off work. I just didn't wait to check in with you. Steve Katie for KHI, he's the one who got me in the ham radio, helped me get my technician, and I've been to 2 field day events with the Drivers Club. And from the first moment I keyed up with their call sign on the HF, I fell in love with it. I felt I had so much fun. The first time I contacted about 60 stations, they could not get me off that radio for about 3 hours. So I'm going to try and get the account set up with Zen, so that's why my name looked kind of funny. But thank you all for having me. I'm probably just going to do listening in the background because I've got to get this van back in where they're raised before they call and yell at me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for coming in, and thanks for speaking with us, and appreciate it. And was there anyone else that I missed? I don't see anybody. All right, Dave, if you'd select me back, please. Well, I appreciate it. I find this is probably the most fun, the most interesting part of the whole class is hearing from the students and what's going on with them. So I appreciate your sharing. I just was looking at our YouTube feed, and our cache was getting full for some reason. I don't know, that may have disrupted our YouTube feed. Again, this is the first class of the year using this new equipment and whatnot, so we may have some things that we have to tweak. But we'll work on it anyway. All right, so let me finish out my little presentation here. Then we'll take a 5-minute break. You can get up and move around, and then Dave will come back and share with us. But the reasons to upgrade. If we can go over to the presentation, Dave, please. We just had some very devastating wildfires in Hawaii, and it prompted a response from the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. You heard somebody talk about that, ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Service, and there's also RACES, the civil defense side of the things. Ham radio operators were active and involved in trying to mitigate the problems that were going on in Maui. Because they say when all else fails, amateur radio gets through. And whether that's absolutely true or not, it can. And in fact, I have my own story. We'll make it brief here. When I was working for Voice of America, my first overseas assignment was to Liberia, Monrovia, Liberia. You know, they said we were going to go to the glamour spots like Montserrat and the Caribbean. No, I ended up in Liberia. And when I was in Liberia, I worked at the Voice of America Monrovia relay station. You can see on the laptop there, Dave, the pictures of the antenna fields, very much like the station that was in Greenville, North Carolina. And inside the transmitting station, this was the transmitter hall. You can find all sorts of stuff on the internet. And these were pictures. Let me see if I can turn on my laser pointer. Okay, there we go. So if you look, this was the transmitter hall where I worked at the Liberia transmitting station, and this is a opposite view. My office was right over here on this side, and I was a maintenance engineer. I was working on maintenance for these transmitters. Well, this was back in 1989, the dark ages, and at that time, this guy came on the scene, Charles Taylor, who was a rebel warlord who, with his band of merry men, coming from the Ivory Coast and started taking over the West African country of Liberia from the then President Samuel Doe. And back in '89, international telephone communications from West Africa was horrendous, not reliable. We received formal information at the VOA station by radio teletype. With radio teletype schedules. Well, what I did was, and it was at his suggestion, Jack Moss, the station manager at the Greenville, North Carolina transmitting station, said, Gary, let's have a daily schedule on 20 meters. And so every day I would check in from my home after work, and Jack would check in from his home at lunch. And we would communicate with each other and just let each other know that the station was still around, that American personnel were still good, and ultimately we were evacuated from the transmitting station, and ultimately we lost everything. By we, I mean the staff, the crew, and the U.S. government. lost a multi-million-dollar facility due to the civil war in Liberia. But in this case, high-frequency ham radio got through, and on a day-to-day basis, it was essential to maintaining safety with the outside world. So without HF radio, regular communications would have been impossible, and it's the general class, when you get licensed, that gives you access to these high frequencies. So reasons to upgrade: more frequencies, high frequencies, more modes, new technical opportunities, and I think a lot of fun, because there are other like-minded people who like to talk DX, like to talk long distance on HF, and so it's a lot of fun. The big reason for me to upgrade is for you to get access to 20 meters. The 20-meter band is open to somewhere around the world pretty much 24 hours a day. And so that's just a great thing, but it's only open to those who have a general class license or above. Now, Dave has said in the past that his big reasons to upgrade were to operate FT8 and FT4 and Parks on the Air and Summits on the Air, and to do DXing on Morse code. He started to do that. So lots of reasons. Everybody has their own. So to qualify for a general class license, you already must have your technician license, or the Element 2, and then you pass Element 3, which is the general class license. That's the new question pool that we just had started in July. If you were a technician licensed before 1987, you might be able to upgrade to general, so see me after class about that. If you had an expired license, a general class license, that's beyond the 2-year grace period, you can get back to general class by just taking the technician class license. And even though somebody mentioned Morse code, it's no longer a requirement. It's live and well and more popular than ever. And we highly recommend that if you're interested in Morse code, that you maybe look at some videos on my website, on the YouTube channel. Mel Robinson, KN4GB, teaches beginning and intermediate level Morse code. And Mel is also an instructor, as is Dave Ivey, on the Long Island CW Club, which has a very innovative and comprehensive program for learning Morse code. So we talked about the book. This is the 10th edition. This is the one that you want to have. And we teach here in this class online what I call a traditional class. We're not a cram course. We take 10 weeks to cover the material that's contained inside the book. And we're going to cover one chapter each week, with the exception of chapter 4, which we divide in two. And Dave will be covering chapter 4 in each of 2 weeks. Chapter 1, that's tonight, that's an introduction. There are no test questions in chapter 1 in the book, but it has very good information about how to use the book and where to find things. For next week, if you would please read chapter 2, Procedures and Practices. If you can get into a pattern to read the chapter before the class, and then come to class, hear the lecture, ask questions, and then we think your learning will be enhanced. Dave's going to talk a little bit more about enhancing your learning opportunities. So here is the class schedule. You will receive a link to this presentation as a PDF file, so you can download it and view it at your leisure, so you don't have to look at the fine print. But we're targeting to November 7th. That will be our last day of class in November. And so what we want you to do is to be thinking about, where am I going to take my test? When am I going to take my test in November? Because that's the finish line. And it's a 35-question multiple choice test based out of the question pool of 429 questions. You need to get 26 of those questions right, 74%, in order to pass. We're also going to provide you with a resource called the Right Answers Study Guide, which has all of the test questions and just the right answer. Some people like to associate question, answer, so we'll provide this to you. You study the way that it works best for you. We're going to provide you more than enough resources. We'll provide you with copies of videos of the classes, and we'll also provide you with MP3 audio files. So if you want to listen to us in the car while you're driving, you can do that. That might be a little torture, but okay. So where will you take your test, and when? You're going to take it in November. And where? You might have a local ham club. Look around and decide now where and when your test session is going to be. Can you take the test online? Yes, you can. With COVID, a lot of new things became possible. And so I'd have you take a look here at hamstudy.org/sessions. There they have both online and in-person test sessions, and you can go out ahead to November and find something there and go ahead and schedule it ahead of time. You are the key to your success. If you want your amateur radio general class license, you will get it. Just follow the pattern that we teach you here, eventually be taking practice tests, and you can do it no problem. But your motivation is the key to success. So we'll ask you to bring your book to class, something to take notes in. Taking notes is very important, and a scientific calculator. This is the one we recommend. Dave will talk a little bit more about it later, but it's the Texas Instruments Model 36X Pro. It's about $30, $35 on Amazon. You can also find it at Staples and Office Max. It's not that expensive, but we will teach keystroke by keystroke use of this calculator. So it's probably a good investment. We also use this calculator in our Amateur Extra Class course. I'm going to ask you also to go to the American Radio Relay League's review site. It's called arrlexamreview.appspot.com, and sign up if you don't already have a free account there. And there's where you can review test questions from each chapter in the book, and also eventually take practice tests. And this is the way that you acclimate yourself to the questions and the answers that we're going to be talking about. Somebody mentioned Dave Kassler, and we also recommend Dave Kassler. He used to make introductory videos that were freely available to amateur radio operators on his own website. Well, he's now signed up with the American Radio Relay League, and so now his videos for general class and extra class are only available to ARRL members. But that's okay. You should be a member. It's the national organization that represents amateur radio operators in the United States, and so we highly recommend it. Each week after class, we'll send an email with a link to where you can download PDFs of this presentation, other presentations, the right answers study guide that I mentioned. Also, our classes are being streamed to YouTube and recorded there. If the recording gets messed up, like it might have tonight when I saw that our cache was full, we'll make sure that a pristine copy goes up on YouTube as well. And we'll also have an MP3 file up there for you to listen to. So in general, ask questions, communicate, find other hams, find us on repeaters or on email. Share with your fellow students. I've left all of your email addresses in the clear. So you can actually, if you find somebody who's simpatico, you can email them and ask them a question. They might have an answer for you. I say that Dave and I are the teaching team. You all are the learning team. So learn together. If you haven't already, please consider joining a local ham radio club. They're a great resource in your learning. I'm a member of the Greer Amateur Radio Club and the Anderson Amateur Radio Club here in the area. If you need to find a club, ARRL has a website here you can go to and just put in your zip code and they'll give you all the nearest clubs to you. A ham ticket is a license to learn, and you can have fun while doing it. Dave and I don't know everything, but we know enough to know that there's always more to learn. And so we'll get you your license, but then that's when the real learning begins. And we mentioned ARRL membership, QST magazine, and all of the others are very valuable resources. So you might already own an HF receiver. Somebody said they mentioned they bought an IC 7300 ICOM transceiver that Dave Kassler recommended. Great radio. Hook it up. Hook it up to a long wire antenna. Don't transmit, but listen. Start listening on the amateur radio bands, because when you hear what we're talking about live on the air, you go, oh, that's what that was all about. If you don't have an HF receiver or transceiver, consider using any of these online software-defined receivers. Listen in the ham bands and hear what's going on there. Listen for contacts. Try to relate what we talk about here in class with what you hear on the air. And if you got a question, write it down and bring it back to class, and we'll talk about it. I want to welcome you to ham radio, which I consider to be the best hobby in the world. This is a worldwide hobby. You can have fun and learn something new in this hobby. So for next week, watch for emails from me and or Dave. Watch the suggested Dave Kassler videos. We'll provide you links. Read chapters 1 if you haven't already, and 2 by next week. And come to class next week, please, ready to learn. And if you're watching this on YouTube and would like to get involved in the fun, send me an email, w4eey@arrl.net, and I will put you on the general class YouTube mailing list so that you'll get all of the announcements and all of the links. So we have a limited capacity in our Zoom classroom. We heard from students tonight, but the YouTube is unlimited. And it's available there also for students to go back and review. What did they say? What was that all about? So YouTube is a great resource. Also, by the way, I've turned off monetization for this class. So there'll be no commercials interrupting the class, which was kind of a problem before. We won't make as much money on the ads, but that's okay, because we're home now, and we're going to do the best we possibly can. So we're going to take 5 minutes, then it's going to be over to Dave to tell us a little bit about learning opportunities. Dave, you need my help to get started there? You got it.
Need to get the video going.
Right, so play out on YouTube, so that the right-hand switcher, and make sure that it's queued up for back soon.
Not seeing the cues coming up.
All right, stand by.
It should be this button and this button, right?
Okay, there we go. me just take a moment here to just thank someone who isn't here with us tonight, but was here earlier in the day. I was doing a bunch of troubleshooting on our equipment here in the studio, and was trying to get some things working, and they weren't working. And so I started the class session on Zoom earlier this afternoon just for doing some testing. And who would be there but my friend from Palestine, Thabit El-Masiri, who had misunderstood and thought the class started at 6:30 p.m. UTC, which Universal Coordinated Time, which is what hams use for all of their logging, etc. Well, he was a godsend. He helped me work through some problems, some issues that we were having, and we're on the air. We would probably not have been on the air had we not had that help. So that's the ham spirit. That's the ham community. And so I just wanted to say thank you to Thabit for his help earlier today, and appreciate it very much. He's on the air. He used our classes here from the United States. He watched all of our videos, he said twice. Okay, and then he went to the Palestinian Licensing Authority there in Gaza and took his Palestinian license and passed. So if you're ever in the market for your Palestinian license, I can say that you can watch his videos. And with that, Dave, are you ready?
Yep, sure am.
Over to you.
Yep. I can see I shouldn't have worn a black shirt with a black background, but you can see my smiling face better here, so I guess that's good. All right, so 2 sections in what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Just some general things about what we're doing in study, and then some very specific things in terms of study tips that I think you'll find very interesting. You've probably never heard some of the things I'm going to talk about here tonight, but they'll be very helpful in pursuing your class. Now, because I talk about the math section, I have to put something up about numbers. And some of these you've already heard about, like 429, I think Gary mentioned. That's the number of pool questions. 10, we've heard that number tonight a couple of times. That's the number of chapters in our book that we're going to be covering. It's also the number of weeks in this class series. 35, you may recall, that's the number of questions on the test. So although we have only 35 questions, they're drawn from this pool of 429. So you don't know which of those 429 you're going to get. That's why we're going to cover them all in the class. So 26 and 9, wonder what that is. Well, you have to get 26 right to pass, or you can get 9 wrong if you want to look at it that way. And the 74%, that number is going to come up again a little bit later in this presentation, but that's all you need to pass. And the 90% plus percentage that pass our class, or pass the test after taking the class, we have an extremely high pass rate if you'll do what we recommend. That's why we spread this over 10 weeks and provide a lot of resources. So if you'll hang in there with us, we'll help you get there. So what are our objectives? Well, first of all, just by waving your hand, is there anybody out there that wants to get 100% on their general class exam? Okay, we've got a few hands waving. All right, that's good. Glad to hear that. So we want to give you the confidence to do that. Personal growth and insight. We don't want to just have you know the answers to the questions, although that's helpful to pass your test. We want to provide enough context so that you'll understand the reasons that the right answers are the right answers. We want to provide just enough theory to give you a valuable experience here in the class and in your future ham radio career. We want you to become a better learner. We're sharing some tips there. And then we have some assumptions about you. I don't know if these will turn out to be true, but math may have discouraged you from the general exam sooner. some people have looked at the book and either been worried about the technical part or the math part, which isn't terribly difficult. The journal isn't too bad. If you've looked at the extra class book, the math in chapter 4 isn't scary, it's terrifying. So when we get that far, when you want to move on, we can definitely help you through all of that. We've got some tips and techniques that will help you through that stuff that looks really scary. The study questions, if you just jump to those, they may feel intimidating without the background to go with them. That's okay. Some people that don't have a technical background are going to feel like this is way over their head. Well, it's not. We'll get you through it. We assume that you're not an electrical engineer. If anybody in our class is an engineer of any kind, if you just wave your hand, I'd kind of like to see. Oh, okay, we do have one or two. Okay, very good, very good. So for the rest of you, we're assuming that you're not an electrical engineer and you don't want to become one. That's okay. We assume that you've been exposed to high school algebra, but it might have been 100 years ago. We don't have to solve for variables. We don't have to rearrange formulas. We don't have to do anything like that. The formulas that we will be using are what we call plug and chug, where once you see the formula, you just put the values where they belong, press enter on the calculator, and you get an answer. So you don't have to do any algebraic manipulation. I was very pleased by the responses we got during the introduction. It's obvious that those that are wanting to go for their journal are highly motivated to do so, and we're thankful to have you. There's some folks here that just want to review some of the technical portions that they might have missed when they took the test. And as we've said, license to learn, willingness to try, those are the prerequisites. So let's talk about some learning preferences now. You may have seen some of this in the past. There's 3 types that I'll talk about. There's the visual learner. Visual guides and models show me. That's my wife. She wants to see it on a blackboard. Have somebody walk through it with her preferred learning style. Then auditory. This is oral communication and written language. And this is me. If you give me a book, I'll go study it and I'll figure it out from there. And as we're going through these, see where you think you fit. Then kinesthetic, a big word, just means learn best by doing. And so again, with a wave of hands, and you can be in more than one category, but how many of you would consider yourself a visual learner? Okay, a couple of them. All right, how many would consider themselves an auditory or book learner? A few more. And how about those that learn best by doing? Wave your hand. Okay, yeah, we've got a good mix in the group. So the good news is that we try to give you a little bit of all of that as we go through the class here in the different materials and in the presentations. These I've listed as learning preferences. You can actually benefit greatly by all 3. We'll touch on that a bit more also. So the success plan, we have a fairly, a lot of focus on the general exam questions. So a lot of our presentation is guided that way. We want you to understand how to work the formulas. And we will be working through either all of the example questions or at least one of each type. There are some that are somewhat repetitive, just use different values, but we'll make sure that we work through at least one of each type. So what's our tool set? Well, the General Class License Manual will be important. The calculator we've mentioned. And I'll be we'll be making available a handout called the General Class Reference Sheet. What this is, it's a one-page sheet that has got all of the formulas on it in one place. In the book, they're kind of spread all over the place, but I think that'll help focus us on just what's important. Practice problems are the pool questions. And mindset. This is a concept that some of you may not have heard of. There's what's called a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Fixed mindset means you believe intelligence is fixed. So whatever you were born with, that's what you've got. So if you're not good at something, you might believe that you'll never be good at it. I don't think so. Growth mindset, this is where I'm trying to lead you, if you haven't ever thought of this before, means that you believe your intelligence and talents can be developed over time. In fact, there are those that have studied this at great length. There's an article here. These links will work in the PDF that you get. Highly recommend reading that. Believe that you can actually increase your IQ over time. I know that's kind of controversial, but it's all comes with the growth mindset. If you believe that you can do it, you'll be able to. You'll be in the right frame of mind. Generally, people will live up to their own expectations. So if you find yourself identifying as a person with a fixed mindset, these things will probably be true of you. If you identify as somebody with a growth mindset, you won't be afraid to take any of this on. And the good news is, if you find yourself tending toward one side or the other, it's very easy to shift once you're aware of what's going on. So highly recommend you read this article. Now there's something called a memory dump sheet. I was introduced to this when I was studying for my project management professional certification, something that our instructor recommended. And what the concept is, it's on no more than one piece of paper. It's something that you create, so it's unique to you. And the things that you don't want to forget for the exam, those are the things that belong, excuse me, on the memory dump sheet. In our case, it might be unit values and conversions, maybe some formulas. So you commit it to memory and then practice reproducing the dump sheet on a blank piece of paper. And then what you do when exam time comes on your scratch paper, which often is the backside of your answer sheet, before you even look at the first question, you can write this stuff down so that if your mind turns to mush when you see the first question, you'll have access to it. So I found this to be extremely useful. It's optional, but I wanted to share it because a lot of people have benefited from it. The calculator, we've mentioned a couple of times. The calculator has the ability to, you can put the formulas, you can enter the values in exactly the same format as the formula appears. And then all you have to do is press enter to get the answer. So it takes much of the pain out of working formulas. Inexpensive. Gary lied to you. He won't do that very often, but they're actually about 20 bucks. On Amazon, I checked today, or Walmart, if you go to walmart.com online, they're about 20 bucks. Other sources like Staples, I think they're 28 now. So I guess he was accurate on that part. So that's the only lie Gary gets to tell today. So this very nicely covers the needs for the general exam. It might be, might argue that it's a little more than you need, but it's very, very helpful if you go on to your extra, because this will really be an essential tool for the extra studies. So we recommend that you get started out on it. Now, there are class examples and the step-by-steps that we'll be doing. In fact, let's switch over to the calculator cam for a minute. This is a neat invention that we came up with for this class, and we'll be able to work through step-by-step examples when we get to doing formulas in Chapter 4, right here online. And I'm also going to be distributing some how-to guides. There's step-by-step processes to work some of the problems that you'll probably only have to look at once if you get confused about how to enter it. But that'll help. That'll kind of be training wheels to get there. And once you've done it once, it'll be fairly easy to do it after that. Here's something that it's a variable. Generally speaking, calculators, the cutoff is graphing calculators. Anything that's less than a graphing calculator is normally acceptable for use in a VE exam. And that includes the TI-36X Pro. Graphing calculators and above will store formulas and things like that, and generally are not allowed. However, you absolutely, if you have any concern, you need to check with your VE team because their rules may vary. And the people administering the tests, they're the authority, they're the law. The FCC doesn't specify anything about calculators. So if you really need, if you're really dependent on using this calculator, make sure that it's acceptable with the VE team where you're going to be testing. And I've got some strategies for doing it without this calculator should you find out that that's the case. Particularly the online exams are sometimes very, very sticky about what you can use for a calculator. So know that in advance so you won't be surprised. And given the amount of time that we have in class, we really won't have time to figure out other calculators as we're going through this. I'd be happy to help people offline, but this is the one that we highly recommend. So learning tools and techniques, moving into the second section of what I'm doing. We're really concerned about brain tools. I don't think you'd use too many of these tools on your brain, but it's the idea of tools. Now, some of what follows, I wanted to give credit to where I first got steered into this path. During Hamcation, that's in Orlando, Florida, in February of 2019, Michael Burnett was doing a forum called How to Pass Your Test on the First Try. And he pointed us to a book called A Mind for Numbers. And I love the subtitle here. It says, A Mind for Numbers, How to Excel at Math and Science, Even If You Flunked Algebra, by Barbara Oakley. So she's a PhD now, and she runs an engineering program in a major university. Well, she used to be scared to death of math. She liked animals, she liked languages. That's what she studied in college and in the military. And she decided that she felt like her career was being held back because of her ability in math. And she wrote this book that is just fabulous. So a lot of the principles I'll be sharing are from Barbara. And here's a link, an Amazon link if you want to go further. There's an easier resource. This is one that I recommend for most people. It's based on A Mind for Numbers, but it was written for kids and teens. They brought a youth instructor in here, Alistair McConville, it looks like is his name, and a lot of pictures, a lot of metaphors, very easy reading. It's a lot more fun. So, and it's excellent content for general class learning. And the Kindle version is in color. And again, this link will work when you get the PDF. So if you're interested in learning more about this subject in general, excuse me, or what I'm going to be talking about next, I wanted to provide this as a resource. Okay, you've all heard this statement, Houston, we have a problem. All right, why are we concerned about learning and learning how to learn? Well, something called the forgetting curve. Now, this has been under scientific study since forever, way back to 1885. If you Google on forgetting curve, there are all kinds of information out there. And what this says is when you first learn something, you might have it at the 100% level. You know it. You just heard it. You know it. What happens one day later? Okay, one day later, look at this. You've forgotten about 50% of what you've learned. All right, so how are we going to make 10 weeks? We're going to be learning some things. You're not going to be tested on them in your exam until weeks later. By 7 days, you're down to 10%. So that this is the problem that we have. It's kind of like, and one thing that Barbara Oakley in her books is real big on is analogies. So you'll see me using those a lot because they're very effective for me and for our past students. The situation, the forgetting curve is like trying to tie cranberries, string cranberries without a knot. In the good old days, and some people still do this in a sort of a craft way, we'll take a string and string cranberries. And the idea is that you tie a knot on the end of the string so that the cranberries won't fall off as you're pushing on new ones. So forgetting is kind of like this. It's also like pouring water into a leaky bucket. Our bucket doesn't look very happy here. The water's coming in and it's just leaking all over the place. Well, that kind of happens with our brain too. Our brain is leaking. So another analogy, I really like pineapple. So that's what I used. Find a favorite fruit. And our magic plant will produce in 11 weeks. So we got 10 weeks of class, and if you're lucky, you can schedule your exam the week after. So you're going to need 10 gallons of water, spread evenly over the time period. But unfortunately, we have a leaky container. So what can we do, is the question. Okay, we saw that already. And in terms of the way it fits the analogy, passing the exam is the fruit, the amount of knowledge, 10 chapters. Our learning is leaking. So we've got this problem. What can we do? Well, we have to interrupt the forgetting process. And that's what the next part of what I'm going to tell you is all about. So the actions that we can take to interrupt the forgetting process, we have to plug the leaks, and we have to relearn where needed. Now there's some strategies that work, and there's some strategies that are not effective. And what's really amazing is the strategies that are not effective are strategies that are quite often taught in schools and instructors. And we're going to get into those, called illusions of learning, that feel like you're learning, but you're really not. And there's some strategies that do work. That's how I wanted to go over this, because I want you all to pass your exam. So look what's going on here, combating the forgetting curve. Remember we saw how the forgetting got down to 10% after just a few days? Well, look what's happening here. It's bouncing back up, and then we're forgetting, and it's bouncing up, and then we're forgetting. So what we're doing is refreshing the knowledge, or relearning in some cases. Also notice something here, that the first refresh, in this case, is 1 day. So if you hear new material and review it the next day, that will bump it back up again. The next relearning is at 3 days. So these get spaced further and further apart. Review at 1 day, at 3 days, at 6 days, and eventually it can be weeks apart, and it'll keep that knowledge fresh. So remember the 74% that I talked about earlier? Well, that lands right here. So if you can be reviewing, refreshing your knowledge, you can keep that knowledge above the 74% forgetting point or remembering point, and that's what you need to pass your test. So let's talk about some strategies that work and why they do. When you get a dump of information, if you want to call it that, from our class, this is what it looks like in your brain. I'll bet you never knew that, right? A special MRI machine, I think, is how they did this. You want it to look like this, all straightened out. Now what happens with handwritten notes is you're reading your book or maybe taking notes during our presentation. With handwritten notes, it's impossible to write down verbatim everything that's coming your way. So what you have to do is slow down and then rephrase that information in a manner that you can write down. That rephrasing is causing you to grab the concept and record it rather than just letting it slip by. So restate the points, the main points in your own words. So note-taking is definitely recommended. I take notes in pencil. That way, as I learn more later, I can erase and add. So create analogies that make sense to you. It seems like everything is connected to everything else, and if you can connect new information to something similar that you've learned before, that will greatly help you remember it. Memory mnemonics and cues. We'll be sharing some of these as we go through future chapters. Little tricks to remember things. Some of these can be quite inventive. spaced repetition. We kind of got a little picture of that before. This is a different view of the graph, but it's showing it again in day 1, day 3, day 6. There's nothing magic about these dates. It's just that the repetition has to be there. And the tool that Gary recommended you get an account for on the ARRL site, AppSpot, will allow you to review this material chapter by chapter. And I hope I can actually do a demonstration on that for you probably next week or the week after. Use self-testing as a recall mechanism. And by self-testing, again, the AppSpot tool will help you to do that, self-testing, and you can do it in whatever repetition level that you wish. And you have to accept that permanent learning takes time. You can't assume that you're going to hear Gary or I give you this wonderful knowledge and you're just going to have it. No, it takes some time for it to sink in, and it takes some repetition. So I've highlighted, or blocked these out. These are the 3 keys that will really help you make it. Spaced repetition, use self-testing as a recall mechanism, and accept that permanent learning takes time. So sleep on it, and then recall. That's spaced repetition. The brain is kind of an amazing instrument in that when you sleep, there's an effect that takes place called memory consolidation, where it sorts out the things that you've learned during the day and puts them in some kind of a logical order in your memory, as long as it's repeated regularly. The brain also will get rid of brain toxins, useless information, and just gets rid of them entirely. So sleep on it, then recall. It's a form of spaced repetition. Now this is what you want. You want your learning to be solid. You want a brick wall of learning, not this. Now we talked about cramming, and some of the people in the introductions mentioned that they took the 1-day cram course, and you probably remembered enough to be able to pass your test the next day. But in terms of knowledge and understanding that would help you over your ham career, this is probably what you actually wound up with. We want a brick wall of learning. So illusions of competence. Now what have your teachers in the past told you you should do to learn material? Well, repeated reading is one of them, where you'll read a chapter or a paragraph over and over and over. What actually happens is after you've read it the first time, that when you start reading it the second time, you'll say, oh, I already know this, and kind of ignore the words that go by. So repeated reading isn't really very helpful. Highlighting almost everything is not helpful. You get a lot of hand exercise, and it might seem like this is going into your brain, but it really isn't. Highlighting is useful, as long as you just highlight a few key points to draw your attention to those. But highlighting everything does not help. I love this one, the logic of classroom explanations. I might be going through a formula or some kind of a problem in class, and it will make 100% sense to you at that time. Say, oh, that wasn't so hard. Dave explained that really well, and I know how to do it now. Well, come back tomorrow or a few days later or on the test, and you'll find that your mind is just a complete blank. So this third one that we've listed there on the slide, logic of classroom explanations. Yeah, it's good that it made sense at that time, but you probably didn't get it into long-term memory. You got to do it yourself. I've got a good friend, part of the National Guard, and they needed to have a ham radio operator to operate some of the military equipment that was set up for communications using ham radio. And there wasn't anybody in his unit that knew how to do that. And he said, oh, I can figure that out. So what he did, he found a site with practice exams, and he did practice exams for like a year. And then he went and took his ham test and passed with 100%, didn't get a single one wrong. But do you know what he knew about radio? Absolutely nothing. But to his credit, he came back, good friend, came back and actually went through the classes that Gary and I do and learned some of the background that is behind it. But that's the reason for that bullet. Doing repeated practice tests before knowing the material and its context will not be very helpful. So cramming before the test, we've already beat this one to death, I think. It doesn't get things into long-term memory. Now, how would you feel about you're going to a doctor to get diagnosed for some serious medical condition, and that doctor's strategy in passing his medical exams was cramming? Well, he might not really know as much as his credential says that he knows. So we want you to have the knowledge behind the things that we're teaching you for your future ham radio career. We're assuming that most of you are going to be in ham radio for a long time. So these are all illusions of competence. It makes it look like you're learning something, but it's not getting into long-term memory. It's like this light bulb and his expression there. He's kind of a clueless light bulb. Yeah, none of these are effective for long-term memory. And you might say, but Dave, they told us these are the things you have to do. In fact, I've got a grandson who's in the Navy, and they were in the nuclear program, and they were doing their training, and the instructors were actually telling them to use some of these techniques to pass their tests. Okay, well, maybe they passed the test, but they didn't know the material. And that's scary. So you want somebody working on a nuclear submarine that really doesn't know what they're doing? I don't, that's for sure. All right, moving on. So kind of a little, it'll feel like we're taking a trip down a different road here, but that's okay. This is going to connect. Think of your brain as a pinball machine. We're going to talk about focus versus diffuse modes. This is a concept that may be new to many of you. So with the pinball machine, you launch the pinball and it goes up here and it bounces all over the place. But notice that it's confined to a fairly small part of the brain. You're all wrapped up in trying to solve this problem. And then, so that's the focus mode. The diffuse mode is when you kind of back away from that and let your brain idle. You're not even thinking about the problem, but your brain still is. And I've got a story here too. I was driving a car, and dark night, but clear, and a deer jumped out in front of me. And there's no way I could avoid him. He jumped up from behind a bridge abutment and smashed the front of the car in, set off the airbags, all of that. And I was trying to figure out, my wife was homesick. I was trying to figure out how in the world am I going to get out of this mess. So I stopped thinking about how to get the car started again. I guess I was distracted with something else. And it came to me after I stopped trying so hard to remember that there is a cutoff valve that most cars have. In my case, it was in the trunk. And you had to open the trunk and go back there and reset this cutoff valve, and that would restore fuel flow. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll go do that. I found it in the owner's manual and looked, and I got going again. So going back to the slide, I had to get out of the focused mode. I was all tangled up and trying to get going. And as soon as I set that aside, my brain kept working on the problem, and then I remembered what I needed to know to get out of the problem. So that's just an example. I don't know if any of you have ever had an aha moment where you're really, really struggling with something, and then you wake up the next morning and you've got it. You've got the answer. Also known as an aha moment. That's happened to most of us. So that I've got some practical ways that we can apply this concept in studying for our test coming up. So more learning techniques that work. Read recreationally first. So the recommendation is, as you're going through one of the chapters in our book, don't worry about trying to understand it. Just read recreationally. What I mean by that is kind of skim through it, look at the highlights, look at the chapter, or at the section headers, look at some of the questions, which you won't be able to answer right away. So just to get an overview, what's going to happen is this will be planting seeds in your brain that will grow the next time you go through it. So read recreationally first, then again for understanding. And Barbara in her book calls this a picture walk. Good term. So back to the focus versus diffuse learning. Here's a technique. We'll have a little bit more on it in a minute. And this is also a method of avoiding procrastination. Procrastination is one of the enemies of learning. This is too hard, I don't want to do it. But anybody can sit down and work for 25 minutes, right? So dedicate yourself to saying, okay, I'm going to work on this for 25 minutes intensely, and then do anything else to disconnect. Go for a walk, wash the dishes, pet the dog, whatever. Now the brain will continue to work in diffuse mode. You've very intensely studied for 25 minutes. You've stepped away from it, but the brain is going to continue to work in diffuse mode and then come back to focus mode later. I don't know if I didn't mention this earlier. These two modes are completely independent. In other words, if you're in focus mode, your brain can't be in diffuse mode. If you're in diffuse mode, you can't be in focus mode. So that's why you've got to disconnect and let your brain keep going. All right, we'll move on. And the aha experience, when the answer finally comes to you. So there's a technique, and I've got this over on the calculator cam. So what is this? This is a tomato. It's actually a timer. It's a kitchen timer. And for those of you that want to learn Italian, pomodoro means tomato in Italian. Aren't you glad you came to our class tonight? All right, back up here. So this is a way to implement this practically. Eliminate distractions. Set a timer for 25 minutes. For some people, soft instrumental music helps them, I guess, settle down. You might have heard of the Mozart effect. Also something controversial, but for me, this is helpful. Then blitz, study as hard as you possibly can for your 25 minutes. The timer's ticking, and the ticking of the timer reminds you to stay focused as well. Then take a walk, exercise, take a nap, do something completely different, study an unrelated area. There's kind of a humorous story here. Thomas Edison, what he would do, he had a very comfy chair, and he'd put ball bearings in his hand. And I don't know if he put a pie tin on the floor or just used a hard floor, but he'd start to doze off. And of course, what do you think happened to the ball bearings when he started to doze off? Well, they'd fall out of his hand and hit the floor. And a lot of times the answer that he was looking for would be there when that happened. It's an example of going from the focus mode to the diffuse mode. I thought that was a great story. There's more than one famous person that has used that technique. Okay, we'll move on. So that's the idea. There's also apps that you can get for your phone to apply the Pomodoro technique that supports this. And if you Google on the technique, there's lots of information about how it's been studied and why it works. So the idea is that you do this and you do a Pomodoro. It's a 25-minute session. They say for kids, make it 10 or 15 minutes. There's nothing magic about the time, just to have something. And so that's one. And then you come back after your break, do another one. And you can do that 3 or 4 times in a row as you're studying. So worthy of consideration. Anybody can do 25 minutes, right? So that a lot of times will prompt you to get going. It fights procrastination. So another learning technique that works is making links to similar concepts. We'll talk about some electronic concept, and you'll say, oh, well, that's similar to such and so. If you can make links like that, it'll really help you to learn the new information. Analogies, related knowledge. We talked about visual, audible, and kinesthetic learners. Well, why not try elements of all 3? That can be effective. And then engage all possible senses. Remember the pineapple that I liked? And by the way, it takes longer than 11 weeks for a pineapple to grow, but you'll have to give me poetic license there. Anyway, engage all possible senses. Imagine the concept. Like, how good is that going to taste when it's finally ripe? Or what's it going to feel like when I pass my exam? And you can bring that down to individual concepts. Imagine the concept, tell yourself a story about it, write out the concept by hand, right? That's what we're all trying to do here. Or teach it to another person. These are all ways that will enhance genuine learning. Now, here's a fellow, Trotman, who had one of our past students passed this along to me. It says, thoughts disentangle themselves when they pass through the lips and the fingertips. Well, what in the world is he talking about? Well, when you take notes, you're passing your thoughts through your fingertips, right? And if you're teaching another person or working with somebody to try to figure out a difficult concept, that's the other half. So if we go back to his statement again, we see that, flip back to the presentation, thoughts disentangle themselves. In other words, things that were confusing become clear when you take notes or discuss it with other people. So that was good. Then I've got a statement here from a pretty smart guy, I think most of us would agree, Albert Einstein. And he said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Well, you all can be the judges on whether or not Gary and I have accomplished that as we go through all of this. But
some days yes, some days no.
Right. Okay, we'll continue on. So, learning techniques that work. Kind of a review here. Recall from, well, okay, and this is another technique. Recall from memory without looking at the solution. So you'll see a pool question, and you'll be, I know that they talked about it, but I can't remember how to approach this. Well, don't freeze up. So read the question and discern what it is asking. Is it asking for power or voltage, or what's it asking for? Then recall what you know about it. Draw a diagram, if that helps. Often it does. Then recall from memory how to solve it, if you can, and solve it. Maybe you can't, but you've gone through this process of pulling the information back from memory. If you're stuck, go back and use the references as may be necessary. Then come back later and try to solve it from memory again. In other words, doing it after you've learned it is a big key. So what to do between classes? Super important. Spaced repetition, got the forgetting curve, or the remembering curve in this case. Use self-testing as a recall mechanism, and accept that permanent learning takes time. Concrete will usually set up within a day, but it really doesn't achieve its full strength until nearly a week later. Learning is a little bit like that as well. So back to our friend, the guy that introduced me to these concepts at Hamcation in Florida, he also has a series of ham radio training material called the Fast Track, in this case to your extra or general class. He's got general, extra, and technician. Other study resources, we use the ARRL manual, and I'd warn you not to get tangled up with too many different resources because it just becomes confusing. There's other online sources as well, but try to stay with us with what we're using if you can. But anyway, commit to a date, excuse me, and stick to it. It's a test date. Make a study schedule and stick to it. If you can study with a friend, I know that's kind of hard in an online situation like this, but as Gary said, we do share the email addresses between us, and you may feel like you've got something in common with some of our fellow students, so track them down, talk about it. Talk to Gary or I, that's fine. Read and recall, engage lots of senses. Learn the material before really concentrating on practice exams. Do them in conjunction, but learn it first. Build your own context around the situation. Take breaks, sort of like the breaks between the Pomodoros we talked about. Learn more than necessary. This is super helpful. Google is your friend here. If there's a concept that you're having difficulty with, you go back to the license manual. That's not any more helpful, let's say. If you Google it, a lot of times you'll find just a wealth of information that will help you not only with that concept, but your future ham radio career as well. Explain the material to others. Don't put off the hard stuff. Take it all as it comes. And this was interesting to me. Get a solid night's sleep before the exam. If you don't do number 11, the other 10 may not matter. So tired brain has a lot more difficulty recalling information. Back to the cramming idea again. That's not a good idea for a lot of reasons. So we are going to have more fun next week, guaranteed. We're going to be getting into Chapter 2, Procedures and Practices, with a focus on the HF bands. Most of you have just done things like repeaters and 2 meters. I know we had one person that was doing some other things on 10 meters with their technician license. But HF is just a ton of fun. There's so many more things you can do. So next week will be valuable. All right. So now what I'd like, well, first of all, Gary popped up. You have a comment?
Oh, I just thought you were concluding, but go ahead.
I've got one more thing that I want to do. Okay. So if we can get back to the class view, what I'd like everybody to do, everybody at the same time.
Hang on.
All right. There we go. Thank you. What I'd like everybody to do at this point is unmute yourself. So everybody unmute at the same time. There we go. And then what I want you to do is raise your hands, and then give yourself some applause for surviving this first class. All right?
You made it.
Very good. Very good. And with that, I'll see if Gary has something he'd like to add.
Well, I just wanted to remind folks to please watch for an email from me. You'll get some additional information and links with the supplemental. And also watch for emails from Dave for next week for Chapter 2. We're very happy that you chose us to be your instructors, and we're looking forward to getting you upgraded to the general class.
Very good. And Gary normally has his links available the morning after the class, although the YouTube links should be available right now as soon as we disconnect. So, yep, happy to have you all, and congratulations on your desire to get your general. Good night.
Good night, y'all.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.